Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble. I'm very happy and pleased to be joined with Patrick Henningsen today. How are you doing, Patrick? Thank you so much for coming to the show again.
My pleasure, Kevork. Great to be with you.
Last time we spoke was the 5th of December 2024. When the election results pointed out that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the US. And now we have the inauguration of Donald Trump. And I just posted the link of this video on X. And I said, don't watch this live conversation with Patrick Henningsen if you expect us to shoulder tap Donald Trump and say, America is so back. This is the post. If you search it on X, you will see lots of people believe and that Donald Trump will restore the mighty United States, which I don't think the United States lost its leverage around the world. However, there were some cases that I also believe that Biden has taken it to the extreme, like the genocide in Gaza. And some of the other ideological issues that the people were very frustrated in the US, from gender, from the LGBT issues, for example, which was enforced, let's say, on the people. And also free speech issues. Funny enough, Donald Trump is a free speech defender now, and the TikTok ban and all this saga that happened in the United States, and everything is just served Donald Trump to be the president. But today I want to speak with you the bigger issues. I don't know if we can call it the bigger issues. I want to speak more like geopolitical issues, one of which is what happened in Gaza in the past year. And now that Donald Trump is the president, he made a few statements about Gaza. He said he's not confident in the ceasefire agreement. He said Gaza is their war. I think he is referring to Israel as their war. So this is Israel's war. He says Gaza is a demolition site. He says Gaza is very interesting. Best weather, best location. And at the same time, Israeli occupation forces stormed Jenin. This is in West Bank. They killed 6 Palestinians and injured 35 more. So it seems that, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, that the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians is still in the process, but instead of the hard power that the Israelis have used in the Gaza Strip, dropped around 4 atomic bombs, it's going to be more like a soft power way to finish, as they claim, the Palestine cause.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different problems and good things and bad things with Trump on this issue. I personally thought, with the amount of money from the Israeli lobby that was poured into the Trump campaign by Miriam Adelson and others, that that position was locked into place. And just in the last few days before the inauguration, we saw some movement on this issue. Trump tweeting out at Jeffrey Sachs, basically slagging off the Israelis and Netanyahu. And Trump's got what he wanted, which is he's got into power. He's been sworn in. The Trump government is into place. So he's getting what he wants. Israel has gotten what it wants without any reservations or qualifications pretty much for the last 15 months and even for decades before that, let's be honest. So there comes a point where Israel can't always get what it wants, especially because of what it's done in the last 15 months. There has to be a price to pay for that. There was an electoral price for the Biden administration. The Palestine issue, the Gaza issue was on the ballot. It might have swung enough or created enough doubt to hurt the momentum of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in their presidential aspirations. But more than that, it's dented the confidence of the global community and the United States as an honest broker. And everybody else kind of that poured in behind them, fine. They normally do with America, whether it's Ukraine or Israel or Iraq or Libya or whatever. But the United States is running point on this. So does Trump really understand the nuances of this issue? Probably not. He's talking about like it's a property deal.
Yes.
But what Trump does do is power politics. He does do power politics. And the power politics between Netanyahu, which Trump will view as a loser, because Trump has probably figured out that Netanyahu is in a weak position, in that he needs the war to continue to stay in power, and so that's a bit of leverage on the U.S. side. But Israel has some leverage over the United States in that they control the battle space, and they control the ceasefire negotiations, and they can subvert or sabotage this ceasefire deal at any time. It's a 3-phase deal, and they're only in the first phase, and we still have to make it to the end of February. What are the odds that Israel is going to create a situation? They already have violated the ceasefire, actually, in the last few days, many, many, many times. So they can create facts on the ground, and this brings us to a bigger conversation: is that we're talking about a short-term ceasefire idea or concept, but what's the long-term agenda? Donald Trump has promised the Golan Heights. Israel's got the Golan Heights thanks to HTS and Al Qaeda, Jolani, and Israel and Turkey and all these actors. But he's also promised them the West Bank. And he's appointed Mike Huckabee as the ambassador, former governor of Arkansas, who is as dumb as a box of rocks. He's basically said that Gaza used to be a Palestinian state, and look how it worked out. Then he said Israel's had this autonomous, independent homeland for 3,500 years in the Middle East. I mean, what planet is he talking about? So that's literally the ambassador from the U.S. So he's not bright. Is a total ideologue, a Christian Zionist, and evangelical. So you're not going to get any kind of, nuanced take or kind of intelligent brokered. No, they're taking orders from Israel, and Israel stacked the cabinet of the Trump administration. Jared Kushner, Howard Lutnick, Mary Madelson have stacked every single foreign policy related position is manned or by a woman or a man who is a Christian Zionist, a committed, in the case of the defense secretary, a Third Temple red heifer cultist, and Pete Hegseth, a religious fanatic, basically. Huckabee's a religious fanatic. He's the ambassador. Defense is religious. Marco Rubio is a product of Paul Singer. He's a product of the billionaire Israeli donor class. So you know where he stands. They've all been to the wall. They've rolled up the white note, stuck it in there, and done the whole routine. Trump himself included. But all the people in the cabinet have been vetted by Israel already. But things are the region's different. What's happened in Gaza has changed things. It's changed things about other Arab states, Gulf states. The whole region is in a state of flux that can benefit the United States in their geostrategic and Israel's geostrategic objectives, but it can also hamper them at the same time because the Middle East is different. Iran has emerged as a regional power militarily and politically. The Gulf states are no longer on board with the Abraham Accords as they were a few years ago because of what Israel's done. Things have changed. The energy dynamics, the economic. Yemen has entered the equation as well. This is a totally different region. It's much more complicated. It's going to require either massive intervention by the United States, which they're not prepared to do, and they're not able to do, or it's going to create a situation where the U.S. will have to double down on their local partners, be they Israel or KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
I watched some of the statements of the Huckabee. His name is Mike Huckabee, right? That you mentioned.
Huckabee. Yeah.
And he struck me with his, I don't know, shall I call it a low IQ? Like even the formulation of his sentences, it doesn't indicate that the guy is smart. Like even for a diplomat, even for someone who is just there to implement a certain agenda, but he's not bright. It's pretty obvious that he has been probably recommended or endorsed by the Israel lobby or some other forces in the United States for him to become the next president. And I totally agree with you that in the next stage, they will try to annex the West Bank. I think there is going to be some destabilization efforts in Jordan in order to open the gates for the Palestinians and say, this is your homeland now. You can live in Jordan. This is your second homeland, because this is, they used to say this for decades. This is nothing new, right? Like, Jordan is your country. What are you doing in Palestine anyways? So yeah, so the HDS coming to power also on this particular timing, it's very interesting that they could pose some, or they could transfer, let's say, this experience of the Ikhwanization of the region or destabilization of the region through these Takfiri groups into Jordan. And people need to understand, even if Jordan and Egypt are basically allies to the United States, that doesn't mean anything to the US if they reject the notion of accepting Palestinians, whether from Gaza to the Sinai or from the West Bank to Jordan. They will literally do a coup, just like they do in other countries, against any leader, even if they were an ally for them. But I slightly disagree with you, Patrick, on just one particular thing, and that is the region has changed. I totally agree with you. But my slight disagreement is, I don't see Iran at the current moment in its peak of strength. Like, if we spoke 6 months ago, I would have told you, like, yes, now that Iran is trying to match the deterrence capacity of Israel, they were like tit for tat, and Hezbollah was in a position like, if you escalate, I escalate, and they were like matching each other. But at the current moment, I see that, like, even the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon is favorable to Israel. They're bombing Lebanon, killing Lebanese every day. They will not respect the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. I think the only power in the region which has emerged with minimum damages was Yemen. And Iran lost its big ally in Syria, which was, Syria was not only a route, it was it's Iran which called it the strategic depth of the axis of resistance. So I truly see that Iran's position at the current moment is more for a compromise with the US than for confrontation. I don't see that Iran is as strong as it used to be a year earlier, before October 7, for example.
Yeah, I think, the whole conversation about the axis of resistance, I mean, there's different ways you can look at it. I'm just looking from pure realist power politics, great power politics. The fact that Iran did something unprecedented twice in the last 12 months, which is fire massive missile salvos against Israel, which it was almost like a unheard of possibility, and then have almost no retaliation coming back at them twice. That tells you something, is that Israel doesn't have the capability to retaliate, or the price that the US would pay if they did would be too great. Why this is important is because there's a lot with the Abraham Accords, or normalization. What the US is attempting to do with this normalization deal, or the security pact that the US is trying to was trying to get Saudi Arabia to come on board with. The quid pro quo was that they would normalize relations with Israel. But after the genocide in Gaza, this a no-go. Now MBS is basically adding a spanner in the works, saying, well, we want to see steps to Palestinian statehood. Well, Israel has already categorically ruled out Palestine. They talk about it like, oh, we agree with it in principle, but we won't put a date on it. So they've been doing that for 30 years. So Saudi Arabia knows that. So no, we want to see, MBS is basically saying we want to see some concrete steps, and then we'll talk about it. So now the US is pulling back. They're saying, well, we can't do this full security pact with Saudi, but maybe a light version, which will be like, drills, military drills, and buy weapons. The drills are just to test the US weapons. It's part of the sales process of buying weapons from the US. So the US saying, we'll protect you if you get attacked. So this is like a protection racket. This is just the same old NATO protection racket. You buy our weapons, we'll sign a pact, we'll agree to protect you. Who would they protect Saudi Arabia from? It's supposed to be Iran. So the whole strategy from the US is to antagonize Iran, to create instability in the region, to make Saudi Arabia feel insecure, and the UAE, and then back them by the same token, and then to create the situation against Yemen, which totally was, I think, personally, I didn't see any strategic value in that for Saudi Arabia, other than instability that it created for the United States and just generally in the region, and to blame it on Iran as a proxy. So then that makes it even more of a problem for Saudi Arabia, and the whole thing's just a downward spiral. And so the U.S. is relying on Saudi Arabia as one of their main local partners so that they can execute a foreign policy of offshore balancing, which they've been trying to do for the last 20 years after Iraq, which is to rely on local partners, including Israel, to police the region and to do their bidding for the Anglo-American empire. And so the whole situation is coming apart. The other thing they're saying is the U.S. is, well, we'll give you a civilian nuclear power program in Saudi Arabia. Well, the Iranians could have done that. In an ideal world, why not just get it from your neighbor? No, the U.S. has to provide it. So the U.S. wants to turn the clock back in the region 50 years. They want to bring it back to 1980 or 1975. And then the Middle East is different. So when I said the region's changed, it has changed in fundamentally different ways. And so you're going to struggle with this. The part you said about Jordan, just to go back, that's absolutely, I think, a huge risk, is that Israel's committed to a policy of ethnic cleansing and genocide. And many of them feel that they almost finished this job in Gaza. This would be required to free up land for settlements in the West Bank and the Jordan Valley. And the pressure release valve that is Jordan, they remove that barrier to push Palestinians in there. It's my fundamental belief that would destabilize the rule to a point where their rule would be untenable at that point. But if there is going to be that type of a instability planned, the U.S. and the British would manage that. And they would manage that by preparing either a military government to quickly take the place of the royal family, and then bring in from Washington or London somebody with a Palestinian Jordanian background, perhaps, or Arab Jordanian, and then that would be the sort of new, democratic leader, not before elections ever take place, but it would be like seen as a technocrat. So that's on the cards. By the way, they're auditioning people for this right now. You can see it if you watch very closely in Washington and London. So this contingency is being prepared. Now, what the U.S. would do is, if there's no deal for Saudi Arabia in principle, the United States and Israel would create facts on the ground that would force some kind of a deal. And that might even include the breakup or the partition of Jordan.
Yes.
Territory that Saudi Arabia has long sought after in Jordan, that they believe is naturally theirs. And likewise, Israel also would have designs on some Jordanian territory for its security buffer zone as well. And so you can kind of see that's like the next potential phase if things deteriorate in the same way that we've seen them deteriorate. The question is, will it continue in that direction? That's the question.
I think Israel, as you mentioned, committed to the plan of quote unquote finishing the Palestine issue. So in this case, it is also very dangerous for Saudi Arabia if they destabilize Jordan via HTS-like minded groups there. And then as we say, the hip of Saudi Arabia will be filled with these jihadists, these takfiris, basically. And they will have every motivation also to go to Mecca at a later stage. I think the Arabic countries were also very, they have collaborated with the US for this regime change agenda in Syria. They have basically shot themselves in the leg. Now Turkey expanded big time in Syria. Israel won in Syria. The Saudis and the Emiratis didn't win much in Syria in this case. Like, they are trying now to create a new climate and bring one of the friends of Bashar al-Assad, or ex-friends. His name is Manaf Atlas. Manaf Atlas? Yes, I think Manaf Atlas. And his father, Mustafa Atlas, was the defense minister of Syria for a long time under Hafez al-Assad. And in 2012, they deserted, and basically, I believe the Saudi and French intelligence, they evacuated them via helicopter to Lebanon and then to Saudi Arabia. So he's being groomed there for quite some time for such a role. But with the presence of Jolani, I think Jolani is obsessed with power at the current moment. So bringing other figures and personalities to Syria to try to match Jolani or compete with Jolani's influence, this is just a recipe for, again, more destabilization. But the Saudis are trying to create a counterbalance for Jolani, because Jolani is the man of the US and Turkey and the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar. So it's not in their interest for Jolani to continue ruling. They're just accepting him as a de facto leader, but I think they have other plans for Syria, different plans. So let's see how will that develop, especially that Manaf is the military man. So if they're trying to bring a Sisi-like character to Syria, this is the guy. To lead some military factions probably later against Jolani, this is the guy. So he used to have a high military position in the army. But since we're speaking about Israel and the expansion and kicking out Palestinians, I think one of the issues that Israel is interested in is Kurdistan in the region, establishing a Kurdistan. And I would like to make our Kurdish friends, I have in no way or shape against the Kurdish people. I am, as an ethnic Armenian, we have very close cultural and civilizational ties with the Kurds as well. And I believe that the Kurds are very productive people in Syria, and they're not radical per se, like the HDS. No way. And I understand that they have their ethnic, let's say, driven policies, but I don't want to divide Syria. This is my priority. My priority is to keep Syria united. This is where I come from. Now that we have Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, I've seen many Kurdish, let's say, colleagues, friends, and influencers cheering this, let's say, Marco Rubio's appointment, because they say he is a supporter of an independent Rojava or Kurdistan enclave in Syria. But this exactly comes at a time when Israel needs a Kurdistan state on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, because this is what they say. They say that the eastern neighbors of Greater Israel should be a Kurdistan. So how do you think we can address this issue without offending, let's say, Kurdish people? Because this is a very sensitive issue for them, and they say we want our autonomy, we want our own state, and at the same time, I want them to understand that we're not their enemies, but we don't want for divide the country on ethnic and religious lines. This is very controversial for them.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the caveat. Some of my best friends are Kurds, so I mean, just to put that. So I understand the sensitivity of this, but it's like you have to, when you're having this the problem in this conversation, and it's been like this since the dirty war on Syria began. Yes. Is that you can't have a conversation, whether you're diplomat to diplomat, whether you're journalist to diplomat, whether we're pundit to public or to pundit. We have to agree on first principles. So myself, just as general default, I tend to default with international law and international norms. And international norms are that you need a good reason to have an autonomous region or a breakaway part of a state, and normally it's because that the government is raised an army and running a program, is killing your civilians, that kind of thing, and you have no choice to defend yourself. So the Kurds in Syria did not have that excuse with Damascus.
Yes, but they could have now with HTS.
They could have now with HTS. Exactly. Very good point. But this is one of the problems, that the destabilization of Syria to make Damascus weak, to make it vulnerable to what happened ultimately in December of 2024, only 2 months ago. The pivotal role, in my opinion, was played by the Kurds in Syria, that they, I believe, betrayed Damascus. Not that they were particularly loyal, I think, in the long term, but by partnering with the United States to occupy and to steal the oil, gas, the wheat, the hydroelectric power, all of the things that the U.S. was able to deprive of the people in Damascus while keeping them simultaneously under sanctions, that the Kurds played a role in a crime against humanity, against the Syrian people. And that's how I look at it technically, because I think this is true. So they used, the United States used the Kurds for this reason. The Kurds were happy with a few, suitcases full of dollars and promises of future statehood. That's pretty much, and some security guarantees. And then they're on board with the United States in this interim project that started in 2017 when the U.S. and Brett McGurk arrived to carve up, their little chunk of Syria, but they needed a local partner, and that was the Kurdish forces. They rebranded them to the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, so that it looked okay to the Western media and so forth. And then that created the situation that allowed many things to happen. It allowed ISIS to remain in existence. It allowed the Syrian army to be tied up. It allowed Syria not to have full control of the airspace. It allowed Israel also to have some advantages in striking Syria. All of these things were, and the U.S. to occupy illegally. So they're to blame. The Kurds are to blame for the collapse of Syria. It was within they had a choice. They didn't have to partner with Washington. But the Kurdish people have always been used by the West to achieve their geopolitical ends, and then when those ends are achieved, they're then dumped, and they become sort of geopolitical cannon fodder. Now, they could re-engage them in what you talked about, to create a breakaway region. Ultimately, the goal has to be for Israel to break Syria up into a dysfunctional rump state in the center, and then 3 or 4 other enclaves on the periphery. And then that would be better for Syria in that sense. So, it would be better for the United States. And this would be good for Israel, because a weak neighbor is good for Israel's security, and it reinforces their narratives. So with regards to the Kurds, they don't have any right to have a state, but they could create a situation where they would want to. And now this is the optimum situation now. So this is a problem. It also reinforces Rubio and even Noam Chomsky supported Kurdish, enclaves, because it reinforces this idea that somehow you deserve an ethnic homeland because you're continuous, or you seem to be a cohesive ethnic group, and you don't have who else uses that narrative in the region? There's really only one other country, which is Israel, a pure religious or pure ethno state. So that's why Israel supports the Kurdish idea or concept, because it reinforces their narrative of Zionism. So this is Kurdish Zionism at the expense of Syria, at the expense of Iraq. Think about Iraqi Kurdistan. That border became formalized because of the United States in both Gulf Wars and the no-fly zones that were created. And now you have a situation where Israel has potentially cut a path from the Golan Heights straight through to this unstable eastern part of Syria, right into Iraqi Kurdistan, right up to the border of Iran.
Yes.
And it means that they no longer have to rely on the United States for air-to-air refueling, to wage massive airstrikes. They have a clear path straight their way through, potentially. Now, whether they exercise that option is another matter in the near term. But certainly, this has to be on the mid to long-term planning strategy, and it even could come as sooner than we think. And this is great. This is great for the United States, because they could take a step back and say, "Hey, we're not going to get in Israel's way. I mean, we'll provide them with, planes, bombs, tech support, satellites, intelligence, but we're not going to do air-to-air refueling." So in a war against Iran, or a preemptive strike, or some kind of a massive operation. So for Iran, I'd be very concerned about what's happened in Syria, and very, very worried about how this might play out. So, so the Kurdish people have to understand that they are being used by the West, and ultimately there will be a backlash. They'll always be resented by their neighbors for this. I mean, certainly they have no friends in Istanbul. And that situation's been used to create that tension in Syria. I mean, you can see how all the players have are leveraging off each other to create the situation where the Kurds are compelled to play a certain role for whoever or to be against whoever. And this is why they're a pawn on, a grand chessboard.
I think were it not for the US direct military financial support, there wouldn't have been Syrian democratic forces on the eastern shore of the Euphrates. And I'm not, as a Syrian, going to say like betrayed or traitors and this and that. However, I totally agree. Like they have been used as a pawn. First, as the war against ISIS when the Frankenstein has gone out of control in 2015. So also there was a shift in the U.S. policy from using ISIS against the former Syrian government to occupying the areas of ISIS, basically in Deir ez-Zor and in the oil-rich regions via the proxy army SDF in this case. So I just want to respond to one of the commentators to say, so Kurds don't have a right to autonomy, but Palestinians do. And this is two completely different cases, because the Palestinians in the region, first of all, they were colonized by the Brits, before that by the Ottoman Empire. And the Palestinians didn't have a say when Britain brought tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of settlers from all around the world, and some of which are from Russia, from Ukraine, from Western Europe, from Germany, from Poland, to Palestine, and give them more than half the territory, basically, and call it an Israel in this case, right? And the Palestinian people have the right for self-determination, and the Jewish people have the right to live there. Those who are indigenous, but not the people who come from all around the world, from Pennsylvania, and claim citizenship on Palestinian territories, and they receive a home and a housing in a settlement in West Bank, etc., etc. In the case of the Kurds, they are part of the Syrian people. Like, I am ethnic Armenian, guys, and there are different ethnicities in Syria, right? So if every ethnicity and religion is going to create an autonomous enclave, then let's divide Syria into 20 countries, right? Yeah. So the Syrian identity can combine an Armenian, a Syrian, a Syrian, a Syriac, a Kurd, an Arab, and Yazidi, a Jewish, and all these different components of the Syrian society were under one umbrella. It's a Syrian identity, right? You could have then your sub-identities, ethnic or religious or sectarian, but the bigger umbrella has been always Syria. And in the case of the Kurds, it's not an organic autonomous movement. This is something that people have to understand. It's been supported and endorsed and by money and by weapons via the US. And Israel also sees the region in as ethnocentric, let's say, lens, and they want for their neighbors to be why not a country for the Druze? Why not a country for the Alawites? Why not a country for the Kurds, and etc., etc. And when you divide your neighboring countries on vertical lines, then why not Israel is a country for only the Jewish people, right? If your neighbors are not multicultural and they don't have a mosaic and everyone is just one-colored countries, mini states, then Israel also thrives in such an environment. This is the point that the Kurds, they occupy now 1/3 of Syria, which includes 50% of Syria's oil and most of the wheat and cotton. I think they don't have an exclusive right because for 50% of the Syrian oil. So they have taken that oil for over a decade now and kept it, and they finance their military presence there, and they didn't share it with the rest of the Syrian people. But this is 1/3 of Syria occupying half Syria's oil, plus the Kurdish people on this 1/3 of Syria, they don't represent the majority there. Like, the Kurds are not a majority, even by the percentage, if you calculate it, they are below they are 1/3 of the Syrians basically living in this area, and because they have the guns and they have the Americans on their back, so they can establish a rule. And I was for a long time a proponent, a supporter of a reconciliation between the Damascus government and the Kurds. that if there is a way to give the Kurds an administrative autonomy, they run their schools or they want to teach the Kurdish language, but this separatist movement, this is the point where most Syrians rejected. And I'm not talking about pro-Assad or anti-Assad. Most Syrians rejected it. They didn't want to give the Kurds an autonomous state, because then why not the Arabs? Why not the Armenians? Why not the rest? Everybody will ask for it, right? So in this case, I think it's too late now anyways. I think Syria is being actively divided now. And I'm reading reports even by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which has been known for its anti-Assad position for a very long time, now is warning against these plans and saying, guys, the Turks are going to capture Latakia, Tartus, and Jable. And Turks already occupy Aleppo, Azaz, and Afrin. I mean, who's running the country? Who is Jolani? Jolani is the intelligence construct of the Turkish intelligence. He's the guy of Hakan Fidan. And when Hakan Fidan came to Damascus, who was sitting with Jolani in the car together in the back seat, like cruising in Damascus? That's Hakan Fidan and Jolani, right? So I think all these things have to be taken into consideration, especially when it comes to the Turkish case and the Kurdish case in Syria, just for everybody to, I didn't see now the rest of the comments. Speaking of HTS, I want your reaction to two things, my friend. First things first, let's bring some spices to our conversation, because that's the purpose of our today's conversation. So HTS regime congratulated Donald J. Trump on his inauguration. A statement by the new administration of Syria congratulating President Donald J. Trump on his inauguration. On behalf of the leadership and people of the Syrian Arab Republic, I congratulate Mr. Donald Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the US. His selection is a testament to the trust placed in his leadership by the American people. The past decade has brought immense suffering to Syria, with the conflict devastating our nation and destabilizing the region. We are confident that he is the leader to bring peace to the Middle East and restore stability to the region. We look forward to improving the relations between our two countries based on dialogue and understanding. We have faith that with this administration, the US and Syria will take the opportunity to form a partnership that reflects the aspirations of both nations. We extend our heartfelt wishes for his success as president and for enduring strength and prosperity to the American people. I haven't seen any leader or a de facto leader of a country whose country, 1/3 of his country is occupied by American forces, and then Fox is congratulating the president of the country which occupies his country.
It's speechless, really. And the other thing is, how is Jolani a legitimate government? It's not a government. It's by definition, according to international law, according to the international press's own legal handbook. This is how AP and Reuters should be addressing the situation in Damascus. Technically, it's a military junta. It's a junta. And in this case, it's a listed, prescribed terrorist organization that is basically at the head of the junta. So it's not a government. There's been no plebiscite. There are no promises of elections this year or next year or the year after or the year after that. So normally what the U.S. would engage with those representatives like this and say, you need to give us a timeline for elections. That's been U.S. policy across the board for time immemorial. And in this case, that's just been suspended. And there's been no explanation. There's been no sort of accountability from the British, from the Americans, why they aren't demanding election date, because they do it everywhere else in every single time. So they can't be seen to throw their support or even to have open diplomatic relations with a terrorist junta unless this junta is giving some promise that there's going to be a plebiscite. There's going to be some kind of election. So, I mean, you've basically got the heads of ISIS and Al-Qaeda heading all these departments, and then half the people aren't even Syrian. I mean, it's a total clown show. And so they basically emptied the zoo, and the animals have taken over the zoo, taken over the town. To put it crudely, I mean, that's a crude metaphor, of course, but we are talking about head choppers here. I mean, these aren't like erudite, Swiss finishing school, boarding school products from, the political academy with young leaders from the WEF. And this is not what that is. These are people that are hardcore. They're implementing Sharia law in the most extreme sense. This is Islamic State, ISIS style, right on the border of Europe, essentially. And like you said, occupied by foreign powers in different enclaves, Turkey, the United States, and if you count, ISIS or the formation, the remnants of, or the reformation of ISIS, if you count that as a foreign power, they will also claim a piece
Yes.
of Eastern Syria.
You mentioned WF, right?
Israel. I left out Israel, Kevork. Israel's
Yes.
occupying a piece of Syria and
Yes.
liquidated Syria's military assets in a matter of days. I mean, this is just an unbelievable situation. So there has to be a plan. Obviously, this is only a holding pattern for the situation. There has to be a long-term. I think the U.S. will be able to up its presence there with Trump. They will be able to rebolster the Kurdish story again. I think because that's a safe sell to the U.S. public. Oh, the Kurds are our friends. They need support. It's just an easy one. We need to fight ISIS. That's another easy sell to the U.S. The rest of it's complicated. The other one that's a good sell to the U.S. is we need to protect the Christians. The Christians are under threat. And again, that promotes the idea of a Christian enclave. I've even heard evangelicals now talking in America, Kevork, that Christians need a homeland in the Middle East. It's like the Crusades, basically. So I mean, like here we are. It's turned back the clock 1,000 so years. I mean, so that's the kind of we're literally in that same mentality. So I mean, we joke about this, the Crusades, but think about the idea of the Crusades, the concept, and the Holy Roman Empire, and where Europe was at that point, where civilization was, where foreign policy was. And look at how long Israel has been there in the region, 80 years. It more or less mirrors previous crusades, if you want to look at it in that timeline. So, I mean, so that's why I think we can learn a little bit from his.
I think I don't think I have concrete information on this, some of which I can't even share out of fear for myself. But I know 100% certainty that the evangelicals or Christian Zionists were present in Syria in the past decade under the guise of humanitarian work. They've been distributing humanitarian aid, empowering women and giving aid to the churches, and basically for the people who were affected by the war. And they were in Syria, and they were giving basically poor people what they need. And this is let's say on the surface is the noble thing, but they at so many cases they have also gained them they have won their hearts and minds. And there are public figures, Syrian Christian Zionists in the US. They do daily live streamings. They have hundreds of thousands of views on their videos speaking in Arabic. And they are basically telling how Israel Israel has a correct approach, and we have to be allies with Israel, and Christian Zionism is the way forward for the Syrian Christians as well. So they have been involved in this for a long time. Another group was involved in Syria under the guise of humanitarian work were the Freemasons.
Really?
Yeah, of course. And they were in direct touch with humanitarian organizations in Syria, local, we're speaking, and most of these local NGOs in Syria, they had no clue about anything with who they are dealing. They just need money to continue giving the people what they need. So, and in this dire situation, nobody did the research. And I found out that the Freemasons were in Syria distributing aid, basically. This was 1.5 years ago. And myself only noticed it 1.5 years ago, but I think that they were there for quite some time. So those were the cases present in Syria. I wanted to show you one photo, which was, I think, the Norwegian foreign minister wanted to go one step further and call Jolani His Excellency, basically. And this was so absurd to call Jolani His Excellency. I checked basically in under international law and diplomatic norms, is it possible to call Jolani basically and okay, so I think I'm sharing this now with you. Let me check. Windows, this, share. Okay, it's gone. Okay, anyways, I asked, and the foreign minister would typically not address a militant rebel leader using the title His Excellency. This title is generally reserved for diplomats and representatives of recognized states, such as ambassadors, high commissioners, and nuncios. Militant rebel leaders, even if they claim leadership over territories or factions, are not officially recognized as representatives of sovereign states. In case of Syria's rebel leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, despite his group's rebranding and attempts to appear more moderate, he and his faction Hayat Tahrir al-Sham are still designated as a terrorist organization by several international bodies, including the United Nations, EU, and the United States. Therefore, addressing him as His Excellency would not be appropriate in official diplomatic communications. even the AI search engine knew about this, but not the Norwegian foreign minister.
There's the kind of geopolitical sycophancy where all these European leaders, Alina Baerbock from Germany, the Norwegians, are running to Damascus to get this photo op. And I think this kind of like the kind of Zelensky effect, where they need to get that social media image to project back to, you know, their constituents back at home and the media, that they're kind of a player on the international stage. And look at us, we're here in Damascus, and isn't this wonderful? And I really think some of these people are so divorced from reality and so out of touch with what they're actually interfacing with, and have no idea about anything that we've talked about that's taken place over the last, 15 or so years. They don't have a clue, not interested. And even if you sat them down and explained it to them, they'd be there with their jaw, kind of half open and, drool coming out of the side of their mouth. Probably be bored about what you're trying to tell them, Kevork, about, the facts about what happened, because in their mind, they just have this narrative that there was an Arab Spring moment again in Damascus, and it was an outburst of democracy, freedom rings in Damascus, and the people have been liberated from the evil Bashar al-Assad, and the butcher of Damascus, as they called him, literally as head choppers are rolling in, and pulling out Christians and Alawites and executing them summarily on the street, telling women they can't serve in different positions, starting to segregate men and women, enforcing dress codes in places like this, rewriting the law.
Yes.
I mean, so what about the Assad government that was so cruel? And then we really interrogate that question, and what do we find? Oh, well, the Caesar photos. Oh, well, Sidnaya prison. Oh, well. And Bashar al-Assad killed, I don't know, 1 week it was 200,000. The next week it became 300,000. Then it was 500,000 a month later. And it was like 1,000,005 3 months later. They just kept making up, including the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is partly responsible for that propaganda campaign, but making up this death toll, this mythical, arbitrary, ungrounded, non-specific death toll that they're attributing to the Assad regime, and using all of this to basically pin down the country under sanctions by the European Union and the United States, and crushing it, gradually strangling it and ultimately crushing it. And so that's what really happened. That's how it really happened. And so now you have something much worse in control of the country, but people are still in denial. You're a Norwegian minister there, you're a German minister, and the list goes on. They're totally in denial. They have no idea what they're shaking hands with. They have no idea what the hand that they're shaking had just done months ago or years ago. How many families in Syria have people who have disappeared or been, literally executed by these madmen, and how that's destroyed and broken up communities and created the civil war that was not civil at all. and they're totally oblivious to all this. And so this is a real soul destroyer for a lot of people in Syria to watch these people getting. And I know, because you're not the only person, I think, that shares the abject horror. I've spoken to many other Syrians inside and outside the country that can't believe that they're treating this like a legitimate government after what they've done. So it's no law and order. So no expectation. Empty the prisons. Terrorists come in, take over the government. There's no expectation of norms or law and order. This is just complete anarchy, sponsored by foreign powers. Can you believe it? It's the worst
Syria is
possible
free.
outcome. It's the worst possible outcome.
This is what they're telling us. Syria is free. And one of the indications that Syria is free, that the HTS foreign minister, Asad Hassan al-Shibani, he is now invited to the World Economic Forum in Davos this year. This is the first time a U.S. foreign minister or a Syrian foreign minister or diplomat is being invited to Davos, to the World Economic Forum. And since we're speaking about economic forum and probably more technological issues, I want to bring the conversation to the billionaire tech billionaires when they were on the front row of Donald Trump's inauguration. And our friend Rachel says takeaways from the inauguration so far. They really put Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and his girlfriend's tacky attire, Sundar Pichai, and Elon Musk front and center. Interesting message to send about the state of big tech. Also, our friend Thomas Fuzzy published an article on this particular case. He says, "Welcome to America's techno-military future. AI will be harnessed to assert global dominance." As he begins his second term, Trump's links to the tech industry are vividly clear. Musk, to give one example, pledged substantial funds to Trump's campaign. He was duly named co-lead of the new Department of Government Efficiency, a role that enables him to directly influence federal budget decisions. Not to be outdone, all the major tech firms have donated millions to Trump's inauguration fund, with everyone from Jeff Bezos to Tim Cook enjoying front row seats on Monday. This signals a major political realignment among Silicon Valley elites, traditionally a hotbed of liberal progressivism. Earlier this month, for instance, Zuckerberg announced he would remove fact checkers from his platforms. It seems that there was some regime change in in the United States.
Or a Damascene conversion, more like. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg had his epiphany when Donald Trump, the attempted assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, and when Trump emerged with his fist in the air, shouting, "Fight, fight, fight." Mark Zuckerberg has testified to the public that was the moment where he thought, "Wow, that was really badass," said Zuckerberg. So that was his Damascene conversion on the road to conservative liberation, I guess. So these people are all opportunists. They see where the country is heading. They see the wreck that they created with the Democrats, a crazy neoliberalism, progressivism, wokeism, DEI, and all the crazy policies. And they underwrote all of that. The demoralization of the political opposition, the criminalization of political opposition in the case of J6. So Zuckerberg underwrote that. Election interference, rigging. Zuckerberg was involved in a lot of this activity in 2020, but with these drop boxes, he put 100 million of his own money into targeted poll workers. And there's a lot of questions around 2020. And Zuckerberg is going to be at the center of that. He knew that. So he's pivoting for a reason, to protect himself personally, because he could be pulled into some kind of an inquiry or congressional hearings on the rigging of the 2020 elections or the role that some of these people played. So they're feathering their own nest, and also legislation. They could hold, title whatever over Mark Zuckerberg for censorship and, potentially destroy his business model at Meta. And Elon Musk underwrote this. He's a Democrat. Elon Musk backed the last 5 Democratic candidates. Do you think Elon Musk would have put 100 million into, Trump if Trump was behind 20 points in the polls like Kamala was? No, no. Elon Musk became a conservative in the last 18 months for a reason, because he knew which way the wind was blowing, that the sales had finished for his green. He is the point man for Klaus Schwab's fourth industrial revolution. It's Elon Musk. He's a point man for carbon taxes. He was their main spokesperson. Have you heard him say a word about carbon taxes? No, nothing.
No, he's in favor. He's in favor.
But no, he's not talking about it anymore.
Not yet, not now, but in the past he was a proponent.
100%. He was even shilling for it a year ago. So these people are like very clever where they put their money. And when they get involved in politics, it's not simply for the good of the human race. They're there for a reason. And so now you have this technocrat oligarchy. They want to convert every function of the state, of society, into an automated, convenience-based digital format, basically. And these are all the guys up there. That's the whole front row. And and it's like the only one on there that wasn't I think it was RFK Jr. He was the only one that wasn't a tech bro, but he couldn't take his eyes off Jeff Bezos's girlfriend. So that Maha energy coming
that
from
was so weird.
Sex addict RFK. So it's kind of bizarre if you think about it, Kevork, and I think we even spoke about this. All of the top MAGA people are Democrats. They're all basically recent refugees into the Trump camp. So this has got a lot of the air. So understand that a technocrat is a fascist, ultimately. Okay, technocracy is fascism, and it's not about democracy or holding a plebiscite. It's no, technocrats solve technical problems. So, and if they create the problem, and then they have the ready-made solution, which Elon Musk is doing with X. He is funding fake news through the monetization programs and all the fake news accounts that are putting out garbage to the point where nobody knows what's true anymore. And then Elon tweets out last week or the week before, said, "Grok, my AI is the source of truth in the future."
Yes.
So he created the problem, he funded the problem, and then he has the solution. This is pure technocracy. And so inject really radical right-wing race baiting, race war, culture war, clash of civilizations narratives, which Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, and they're sponsoring Tommy Robinson.
Yes.
So that's their politics. And so, these are the richest people in the world who are funding sectarian, division, in some cases that could easily become street violence in the way that Elon Musk is wielding these narratives. With Tommy Robinson has no credibility in the UK, but they've turned him into an international celebrity by the sponsorship of the Israeli lobby and Elon Musk, who seems to be under the thumb of the Israeli lobby. And now we're getting to where the real story is, because we just have to follow the money. And it's a geopolitical story. It's a social engineering story. And so we have these people who have been captured, and they're allowed to be billionaires under certain conditions. So they have to play certain political cards to keep the game going. And that's unfortunately, I think, the tragedy of Elon Musk. So we'll see how this develops. And it's possible that Trump or Elon Musk could shake the Israeli lobby loose and all the toxicity that they carry, that they inject into everything. They're injecting the anti-immigrant narrative to create an anti-Islam or an anti-Muslim narrative, because that serves Israel's disposition, and their foreign policy influence in the West is based on this idea that we're fighting them here so they won't come over there. We're fighting the good crusade against the barbarians, so that's clear. That's how their sponsorship of Tommy Robinson has worked. But the Israeli lobby have had this alliance with the far right that's gone back 20 or 30 years. They've managed to create the far right, which used to be neo-Nazi and anti-Semitic, is now ultra Zionist.
Yes.
And this cost a lot of money, took a lot of time and work to get to this point. Now you can see it come to fruition. To me, it's one of the most fascinating political stories of
Yes.
the modern era.
Those who want to know more about who Elon Musk funds, you just have to go to his or endorses. You have to go to his profile and see who he is quote posting, basically. And they are all from the same political background, and they're saying exactly the same things. And even United posts at certain times on X, they're creating narratives. And unfortunately speaking, that we expected for X to be the alternative media platform for the people, it has become the mainstream media again. It's like he has created mainstream media by talking heads who are basically sitting on X and just posting on this platform paid by firms, PR firms. And it's very easy for me to see who is paid by Elon Musk.
And X paid by X monetization based on views and metrics. So he can up any account by retweeting it because he controls his visibility in our feeds, whether we follow him or not. So whoever he retweets or so he's the kingmaker in terms of influencers. And then he will also push the political issues that he wants to. So he has his thumb on the scales on every single part of this information space.
Indeed.
And so to me, it's extraordinary. I'm surprised that the left, who are supposed to be like, policing this sort of stuff, they've completely oblivious to it.
So easy. Guys, it goes without saying that the X account of Patrick is in the description below. And this is the YouTube channel also on which Patrick is publishing the 21st Century Wire. So you can also go and follow the podcast conversations and the solo videos that he's posting on his own YouTube channel. And I think more importantly is just follow him on X, and you will see when he's posting his content, also short videos and longer formats there. And you can follow his amazing work. Patrick, thank you so much for coming to the show. I really appreciate you dedicating the time for us today on Syriana Analysis.
My pleasure, Kevork.
And all the thanks also goes to our friends and followers of Syriana Analysis for tuning into today's live streaming. We will do another live streaming tomorrow, guys, on Wednesday, 22nd of January, 2025. If you like to support this work, or if you're liking the content I'm posting, you can just hit the like button, subscribe to YouTube channel, or become a patron. And also there are other means in the description below. So I will see you tomorrow. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.